Hi everyone, I'm going to talk about a very important topic, and specifically it's about paychecks. Now we should all know how to read our paychecks, but no one really explains it to us. And you just sort of get handed this document and you're supposed to figure out and understand what's going on. For the most part, we can Google most of these terminologies, but I'll give you a snippet of each of them and walk us through an example paycheck. Specifically a paycheck that I had years ago. Obviously, important information is going to be blurred out, but it'll give you a good idea about what a paycheck might look like. Your paycheck is not going to look the same as my paycheck, right? Different companies will have different pay stubs, but generally speaking, the information on them will be very similar. It's very important to double check your paycheck and really understand how to read it. There are many reasons for this. First of all is making sure that you're being paid the correct amount. After all, the payroll department is just human, and so they do make mistakes from time to time. It's important that you double check everything and verify, especially when you receive a promotion or a raise of any kind. Make sure you double check those numbers. You also want to avoid paying too little or too much taxes, right? You want to make sure that the company is withholding the right amount of taxes. Otherwise, when it comes time for filing taxes next year, you're going to be in for a surprise. And you don't like surprises when it comes to taxes. You really want to know, am I paying the correct amount, and is the company withholding the correct amount? If they're not, reach out to HR, get it fixed. And lastly here is that you want to understand if your benefits are being appropriately allocated. If you look at your paycheck and you know you're putting money toward your 401k, but you're not seeing a 401k or a 401k match, then something else might be going on there. You want to touch base with your HR department and really understand, hey, is my money actually going to my 401k or something else happening to it? Same thing with your benefits. Right? Make sure that your insurance is being paid for. Make sure that everything is squared away when it comes to the benefits that you should be receiving and you are paying for them. Paychecks are also super important because these are the documents that you're going to be handing to various folks. One example that I can think of is that when you get a mortgage, they're going to want to make sure that you have recurring income. Right? And looking at paychecks for a few months will reassure them of that. Basically, you're saying, hey, I'm getting paid XYZ amount, and this is the company that's paying me. And then they can go ahead and verify the information. You can provide more documentation on top of that. Now that we know why it's important to understand to read a paycheck, let's move on to the details of the actual paycheck itself. So here I have my paycheck from a few years ago, and it details a bunch of information. I'm blurring it out like I mentioned, but you'll get the general gist of what I'm trying to show you. The first thing you'll notice probably is going to be the address. Right? Make sure that your address is correct and your company's address is also correct. If you've ever filed official documentation of any kind, you'll understand how important these addresses are. And if there is any divergence or there are any differences, these lenders or these underwriters will be very picky about it. Next up, we have the exciting stuff, earnings. Right? This is how much money you're making. So this will include the date that you've earned it and the amount. Usually the amount is the gross pay. In other words, this is the income that you're making before taxes and benefits. Right? So when someone gives you an offer letter and say, hey, you're making $60K a year, the gross pay is the $60K. You're not actually going to get $60K throughout the entire year. You're going to get much less than that because it will get taxed and benefits will also come out of it. And if you are an hourly employee, you will see hours here and make sure that the calculation is correct and the hours are correct. Right? Just because you log hours doesn't mean that it will appear correctly in the paycheck. You want to make sure that all these numbers are accurate. You're going to see a few summaries here, basically telling you how much you've paid year to date, how much you've paid in taxes, and so on. But it's really super high level, and we really want to dig into some of these details by going into each of these sections. The first thing I want to call out is taxes are going to depend on deductions. And you're wondering, hey, what are deductions? It's basically the form you filled out at the very beginning of your employment, the W-4. This will tell the company how much to take out of your paycheck every pay period. Right? You put in your W-4, you'll basically put in a number that'll tell them how much to withhold. And if you don't remember what you put in, ask HR. If you want to change that number, ask HR. Right? You can modify your W-4 so that your company can take out the appropriate number of taxes for your paycheck. Once you get to the employee taxes section, depending on the state and city you are in, this will differ. And for most of us, it's going to be pretty hefty because taxes are hefty, especially payroll taxes. The first thing that we see is the OASDI. Now you're wondering, what is the OASDI? The OASDI stands for Old Age, Survivors, and Disability Insurance, which for most of us is Social Security. If you're not sure what Social Security is, Basically, the amount of money that you make in your paychecks will get taxed over time, so that once you reach 62 and you become eligible for Social Security, which you can think of as a monthly stipend from the government for all the taxes you've paid throughout your time that you've been working, they usually average it out and give you some sort of number based on the number of years that you worked and how much you've earned. Check out ssa.gov and make an account there to figure out how much Social Security taxes have you paid over time, and if you do qualify for Social Security or not. The Social Security tax is going to be fixed, right? And the rate can change in the future, but if we look at current documentation, we can find that fixed rate. Following Social Security, we have Medicare, right? Medicare for most of us is pretty straightforward. Basically, it's health insurance when you are 65 and older, or if you have disabilities early on. This is really important, and it's really important that you pay this tax because health insurance is extremely expensive. And when you are in old age, you're probably going to have health problems for many of us. And it's very important that you have health insurance in the form of Medicare. It doesn't include everything, but it's part of something, right? It'll reduce costs. Medicare tax is also fixed, so you can find that rate, which may or may not get updated depending on the cost of healthcare in the future. Then there's the federal income tax, which everyone hears about. Everyone's confused about how it gets calculated, but I have a video explaining it. Whenever you earn money, the government needs to take some of that money out to pay for certain government projects that you benefit from, that the public benefits from, for the most part. Some of us may have state income tax, and you'll see that here, and some of us may not, depending on the state that you live in. If you're curious about which states don't have income tax, feel free to check out this diagram. And then you have city income tax. We live in New York City. Well, at least this point in time, I lived in New York City, so I had to pay that as well. And that will also vary from city to city. And if you're curious about your city and state-based taxes and how they get applied, just Google it, right? Just check out, hey, New York City tax, or New York State income tax. What does that look like? How are the tax brackets broken up? New York City tax, how's that broken up? All you have to do is Google these various terms and figure out how those taxes are calculated. Sometimes they're simple, sometimes they're complicated. It really depends on what that government body decided. And you have a bunch of other taxes that are applied here depending on the city that you're in or state that you're in. Right? For example, New York State and New York City, they also have paid family leave. That's a form of insurance that we have for our residents. And then we also have SDI, which is state mandated disability insurance. Right? So a lot of these things will go toward different public benefits, and you just need to look into it, find out what you're paying taxes for. If it doesn't make sense to you, then you should get out there and vote. Now that we got taxes out of the way, let's talk about benefits. Right? This is the exciting part because this is where you figure out, are you saving for retirement, are you paying for insurance? Usually the top thing you'll see is your 401k. Right? And depending on the type of 401k that you're going with, whether it's traditional or Roth, it can be post or pre-tax deductions. They usually break up those sections, and you'll see it here, along with your health insurance, vision, dental, and so on. It will all be listed here. Those are usually pre-tax, and just make sure that the numbers you're seeing is accurate with the plan that you selected when enrollment period was open. You might see a section here as well for employer paid benefits, which tells you how much the company is paying on your behalf when it comes to these services. You might also see some match here. You might see some information about insurance. None of this is actually coming out of your paycheck per se, but just the company's paying for it, so they're putting it here as well. Then you might see a section about taxable wages. The concept of taxable wages will depend on whether you are saving money that's pre-tax. In retirement, you have a traditional 401k, or if you have benefits that are pre-tax. Right? Any pre-tax benefits usually reduces your taxable income. And so this number you see is just how much gets taxed or gets applied to that tax. You're not paying that entire amount. It's just how much of that amount is taxed. Then you might find a section that seems very similar to W-4 or withholdings, right? Basically telling you how much you're withholding when it comes to taxes and your status is when it comes to that. If it seems inaccurate, ask HR to update it. And finally, the last two things here are time off. Make sure that you are accruing vacation days. If you have vacation days, it's very important that you make sure these numbers are actually correct and you're building the right amount of vacation per paycheck. And if you find any of this information is incorrect, make sure to talk to HR. Right? They'll have answers for you and figure out what exactly is incorrect, and then you go from there in terms of fixing it or making sure that any wages you do deserve are being paid for. And if you aren't being paid fair wages and this is just incorrect on your paycheck, everything's just wrong, and you've talked to your company and it hasn't yielded any positive results, then you may need to reach out to the Department of Labor and file a complaint and go from there. Hopefully that was helpful in helping you understand your paycheck. Maybe this is your first paycheck, and I'm glad I could help you explain it. All right, good luck out there.